Hello, everyone. I want to thank and welcome all of you to this week's art break. Before I begin, I just want to mention that if anyone has any questions or comments, just leave them in the chat and we'll get to them at the Q&A session at the end. So my name is Kaylee. I'm currently a junior here studying art practice, and I wanted to use my art break to talk about two of my favorite pieces in our museums and the amazing artists behind them. We'll be talking about the physical process behind each piece, and then we'll touch on the artist's creative approaches to art making. And then finally, I'll try to put all of that into conversation with one of my own projects. One second. Okay, thank you, Mackenzie, for your message. So the first piece we're going to start with is Linda Benglis's Plum, and I'll actually be taking us to the Andersons website so we can get a better look at this piece. Plum is one of Benglis's many pieces that lies between a painting and a sculpture. So it hangs on the wall vertically like a painting, but it comes off the wall like a sculpture. And I like to say that Plum is very tangible. And what I mean by that is when I look at this piece, I really want to touch it and interact with it, which isn't allowed in the museums. But tangible also means that when I look at the piece, I can imagine what it might feel like if I did touch it, even looking at it virtually like how we are now. Plum has this glossy finish to it, and that combined with its organic shapes really make it feel alive to me, especially when we come down to these more fleshy toned colors here. When I first saw Plum, I thought that it kind of looked like a tongue because of these colors and because of these bumps that kind of look like taste buds to me. But the colors on the edges here are so eye-catching, and I especially love the way that the colors merge together and sort of give this marbleized effect to them. And thinking of the colors and the title Plum, I also have a different reading of the piece, and I can see it being sort of like a soft candy or even a juicy fruit. I can also combine those two readings and think of it as a tongue that's been dyed by some kind of candy. I think that this piece evokes very different feelings for a lot of people. So Plum comes from Benglis's series of what she calls wax paintings. And the way that she would make these wax paintings is that she would apply layers of pigmented beeswax on a masonite board that's the length of an arm and the width of her paintbrush. And she would apply these layers from the center outward, which is why we get that horizontal line in the middle, and which is also why we get the dispersed beeswax towards the edges of the piece. And in this image, we get to see Benglis using a blowtorch and manipulating the wax, which I think is really cool. Here is Plum on the left, alongside a few other wax paintings of Benglis's. I think that these pictures, really show how the layering technique that she uses result in these wonderful stalagmite-like ridges that defy gravity. Benglis really loves materials, and she has said that these materials have a lifelike quality. They can imitate, they have memory, you can mold them, and they can be pigmented. And this idea of memory is really apparent in all of her work. Benglis grew up in Louisiana, where she was surrounded by a lot of free-flowing forms like water and mud. And in her work, she uses a lot of these liquid materials that harden and capture these frozen moments of time. I think that her process is so fun. Like in this image here, where she's doing one of her pour paintings, she lets materials run. In Plum and her beeswax painting, she lets things build up on top of each other. And in this way, her artwork is really a presentation of her process. Here, Benglis is harnessing her impulse to create. She says that she makes things because she's curious, and that she really wants to capture the excitement that she had as a child making art and playing in the mud in Louisiana. She made her big move to New York City during the 60s, so Benglis is coming out of the abstract expressionism and minimalism movements. And instead of replicating what artists had done before her, she takes techniques from those movements and begins to push their limits off of the canvas and into space. And she continues to push the limits of material, form, and process in her work. Material was also important to our next artist. For this piece, we'll be going to the Cantor's website, where there are a few virtual tours that we have of current exhibitions that anybody can take. For this piece, we'll be looking at one of Ruth Asawa's untitled wire sculptures, which is in our Medium is the Message exhibition. Please excuse my cat. So this piece is very important to me because it was one of the first pieces that I studied as a student guide. I was so fascinated by it because I couldn't tell where the piece started and where it ended. And I actually don't think that there is a beginning or an end to this work. There are these intricate forms that are so beautiful on their own, but create complex shapes when interlocked with each other. The layering of material and of the shadow on the walls shows that this piece really makes use of everything around it. There's no space or material wasted here because the wire that Asawa used allowed her to find space without stealing it. Positive and negative space build on top of each other here. And to me, the art isn't just the sculpture on its own, but also how it transforms the space around it. The forms of the pieces naturally flow into each other, creating a sort of movement between them. And when I look at the piece, I feel like these shapes are morphing in and out of each other. And the longer I look at it, the more I see that movement. And even though we can't tell virtually, while it's hanging in person, the sculpture does spin a bit. So this is really a living sculpture. While on a trip to Mexico with her sister Chio, Ruth taught children how to draw, and in exchange, the villagers taught her how to weave baskets out of wire. And this is the technique that she uses in her wire sculptures. She has said that all of my wire sculptures are made from the same loop, and there's only one way to do it. You don't need to think ahead of time, it's two-dimensional, then you go into space, like drawing in space. Excuse me. And the crocheted hoop that she's talking about, or that she was talking about, is like an E, and she would loop that wire around a wooden dowel in the shape of many E's, and then afterwards she can vary the size of the hoop or the dowel and even the weight of the wire to really explore the shapes that she can make. Like this image in the middle demonstrates, she said that she always began from the inside of the piece. And because of that, oftentimes the outside of one form becomes the inside of the next. Sawa would present her sculptures in groups, like how the Pulitzer Art Foundation has done in this photo here. I love how the sculptures come together, sort of like a community in this installation. It really feels like this is just a gathering of people who are really close to each other. And I think that that really parallels the interlocking of the wires within the sculptures themselves. Ruth was raised on her family farm, and she often compared art to farming. So about sculpture, she said that if you just keep at it, you can get quite a lot of work done. And this simple repetitive task of crocheting the wire is a great example of that. There's this natural growth to the forms and to the process that she uses in creating these forms. Growth is really important to Asawa, and she has said that when you plant the seed, you have to care for it. You have to water it, and you have to weed it. Then you enjoy eating it. And this was definitely an experience I had with one of my most recent pieces. During summer 2020, I participated in the Cantor Scholars Program, which provides an opportunity for students to work with objects in the museum and engage in research or a creative project. So I made this piece, Potluck, in response to Stephanie Sihuko's I Am Anne, which is a piece that explores her Asian American identity and what it means to be an American. With the piece, I really wanted to evoke similar feelings to those that I feel when looking at Plum. I wanted people to see the egg rolls and be able to smell them, or to feel like they can pick up the grains of rice and feel them between their fingers. After studying Asawa's wire sculptures, I have also been really conscious of how I use space in my work. And so in this piece, I wanted to play with the layering of sheer fabric. And I also wanted to make sure that all of the elements and materials that I included in the work have some sort of purpose for myself. This project went through so many phases. First, I wanted to do an animation, then I wanted to do a painting, and then I finally decided to work on this embroidered piece. right before spring quarter, when the project started, we had been sent home for lockdown, so everything was changing. Particularly after the BLM protests, I took a step back and really began to challenge my American identity. And this is when the project went from an animation to a painting. But still, I was really unsatisfied with the direction that I was going in. And like Bangladesh, I wanted to be excited in art making and to make something that satisfies my need to further explore my own identity. And so when I went home for the summer, my mom taught me how to sew and how to do cross stitch. And so when I realized that I really enjoyed these forms of making, I decided to go with my gut and work on an embroidery project. With the animation or the painting project, at the end of the day, I was really telling other people's stories, but I think that at the time, it was really important for me to focus on myself, to get to know myself and to question myself and my identity. Potluck challenges my own ideas on myself as an Asian American, what that means, and how I see that appear in my everyday life. And it's done so through objects that I encounter or find important to me. So this work combines my experience as both a Cambodian American and a Hmong American. And the embroidery was inspired by the Hmong embroidery and cross stitch that my mom was teaching me during the summer. And every item has some kind of memory attached to it. So when I see the food, I think of a lot of happy memories and time spent with my family. But the other items that are actually made out of clay are items that can penetrate or be ingested in the body in some way. And those items represent issues faced by the Hmong and Cambodian communities, as well as issues that I have faced personally myself. And so all of these items, the good and the bad, come together to form my identity. And with this piece, I really wanted to be open and serve myself to my audience, but to also learn more about myself. So I started with some drawings, which was the easy part. But then I ran into so many hurdles. This was the first time I was doing a large embroidery project, so I had to figure out how to do the embroidery on a sheer fabric and tie my knots in a way that you wouldn't be able to see it from the front. Perspective was something that I wasn't thinking about at the time, and so I had to figure out a way to work with that. I was really testing the limits of what I could do with thread and trying to figure out how to make thread look like rice grains, or trying to cross stitch an egg roll, which is not something that I would have thought I'd be doing. And probably the most radical idea I had was making some chicken feet out of tinfoil wrapped in fabric and then wrapped in the thread. Even up till the end of the project, I was trying to figure out how to put everything together. But as if I was farming, I just kept going. I talked through my problems and problem solved until I finished my piece, and the only thing left to figure out was what to name it. Potluck is the work of many hours struggling and problem solving and working with my mentor and my Cantor Scholar peer. And I think that the title is just so fitting. Today, we looked at two of my favorite pieces from the Cantor and the Anderson and used them as a way to explore very different physical processes and creative approaches. Even my own process is very unique and resulted in a work that I think has its own aesthetic and look. Potluck was one of my first real long-term projects, and it pushed me out of my creative and physical comfort zones. The process of experimenting, failing, and problem solving were all important to the physical process of the piece, but even more so for myself. I feel like I grew a lot as an artist and as a person with this project, and I think that Linda Bangladesh and Ruth Asawa's physical processes and creative approaches to art and to life are deeply connected to each other in the same way, as we've seen. Every artist has their own art process, and I hope that all of you are able to walk away from this talk with an excitement for making and exploration and experimentation, and begin thinking about how you approach your own work and your own art. With that, I'd like to keep the conversation going and answer any questions anybody might have. But before we jump into that, I also want to mention that These art breaks happen every other Wednesday at noon. And so if you liked mine or you want to check out some other ones, here are the future art breaks that we have. And I will look at the chat. Yes. Yes. Okay. So Ted, I apologize for going a little quickly, but yes, there will be a recording. I believe that you can go back and rewatch all of the information, and I can clarify anything that I might have gone over too quickly or that anyone was confused about. Do I see these artists as continuing to inspire future work? Um, I think so. Ruth Asawa has done a lot more than just her wire sculptures, and now that we have a lot of new pieces from her in the Cantor, I think that she'll definitely be popping up in my life again, as well as Banglis. Banglis is an artist that I had recently found, and so I'm really excited to delve more into her art and into this like strange mind of hers where she's just creating things and having fun. To all of the scheduled date. Yeah, so okay, so all of this. So here are the dates. Here are the dates for the art breaks for Lily. There's one on February 24th, March 10th, and March 24th. And then for Kathleen, you said that thank you for sharing this beautiful work and the process you used. You said that cross stitch is new for you. What other media have you been using? So yes, cross stitch and embroidery or soft sculpture is something that I just picked up this summer and I've been really interested in. But that was kind of like a gateway to sculpture in general. And with sculpture, I've been doing a lot of experimental things. Particularly, I've been doing a lot of 3D printing, which is really fun because I've been using 3D printing in a way that I don't think it's used. One thing I've been doing is printing stamps, and then, well, I've been printing stamps with my 3D printer and then dipping them in acrylic and then making sort of prints out of that because I don't have access to lino cut right now. I also dipped some fake roses into cement for a project recently. And so I think that I've been doing a lot of what Linda Banglis has been doing, which is just getting messy. Claudia says that they purchase postage stamps of Asawa's artwork so they can enjoy every time they place. That's awesome. Yeah, that's really exciting. I think that that's such a fun way to expose yourself to artwork constantly is to buy like postage stamps with art on them. Then you get to see them and then you get to share them with other people. That's great. Oh, I guess I wonder if I'm sorry, Lily, if I didn't exactly answer your question. You can go to all and any of these art breaks. Melissa says, what's the most unusual or unexpected material you've ever used in art? So last quarter I took sculpture 1 and I really experimented in that class. That's the class where I was dipping flowers into cement. And I think that maybe this isn't surprising or unusual as maybe this isn't a crazy answer, but I did this thing where I got some greasy takeout bags because during lockdown, that's kind of all we've been surrounded by is greasy takeout bags. And I ripped them up into strips and then I weaved them together and it created this pattern where like it created a checkerboard pattern where some checkers were like greasy and others weren't. And I thought that that was such a beautiful way to transform this like paper bag that had been stained by grease and food, which I also think is beautiful already because food is beautiful, which is why potluck has to deal with food a lot. But I think that that was very unusual because when I was ripping the strips of paper, my boyfriend came in and he thought I was going crazy because I was just sitting there ripping paper. Mackenzie asks, what are some of your favorite classes you've taken at Stanford and how have they influenced your art making? I love all of the studio classes that I've taken, and um, I think that the 10-week structure of the quarter really pushes you to think on your feet and to like delve into sort of like creative stress, but in a good way. You get to like you have to think of a bunch of different project ideas in a short amount of time, but I think that that really puts me in a great like creative place. But in terms of classes that aren't studio classes, I took a communications class that I think it was called Virtual People, and it was sort of a class that was about like technology and how technology relates to sociology. And in that class, we read Neuromancer, which is the first like cyberpunk book, and we talked a lot about um, basically how humans interact with technology. And I think that that really inspired me to, that's what inspired me to get more into animation and into graphic work. But it also makes you really think about how we interact with not only technology, but other forms of media like art or even with each other. I think that class was really good in opening my eyes to the fact that other people exist in this world and being more aware of how I communicate. Um, Ted, I think that Mackenzie might be able to answer your question about recordings, and thank you. Mackenzie says that we haven't edited the art break videos for the art museum's websites just yet, but we'll be able to email art break attendees when they are edited. So just wait for that. Yeah, thank you, Ted. Thank you, Amy. Um, are there any more questions before we sort of wrap up? Yes, Rosemary, you will be notified when the recordings are available. I believe Mackenzie said that we can email our break attendees once they're edited and uploaded onto Cantor's website. And I apologize again if I was going a little bit fast. Thank you. Yeah, I can, while we close out, I can go back to this slide. Oh, I'm sorry about that, Rosemary. I hope that the recording will capture everything, so you can go back to the beginning. Okay. Uh, Thank you. Yeah, so if there aren't any more questions, I just want to remind everyone that art breaks are something that happen every other Wednesday at noon. So we have an amazing one coming up in 2 weeks that's about art and, let me check, art and civil rights. So that's the next one. And you can, I think that Mackenzie put the link in the chat where you can RSVP for future art breaks. So then you'll have it in your calendar. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I really enjoyed talking with you all. I hope that you guys go and make something today, even if it's not art.